I still remember the exact moment when everything changed. My cousin Tara's wedding reception was in full swing, crystal glasses clinking as relatives huddled in small groups, trading stories of success and achievement. I sat alone at table 11, the table farthest from the bride and groom, nursing my sparkling water. "She's just a college dropout," my aunt whispered loudly enough for me to hear, not even trying to hide her disappointment. I smiled tightly, used to being the family failure. What they didn't know was that in 3 weeks, I would be facing them all again, but in a federal courthouse. The prosecutor would stand up, clear his throat, and announce, "The court calls Deputy U.S. Marshal Bellini." And my uncle's face would go white as paper when he realized that the niece he had dismissed for years was the one who had built the case that would send him to prison. Growing up as Anahi Martinez in a family of overachievers wasn't easy. My parents' modest home in the suburbs of Boston was constantly filled with stories about my cousin's accomplishments. Sunday dinners turned into competitive showcases where relatives paraded their children's achievements like prized thoroughbreds. Jason just got accepted to Harvard Medical School. Aunt Diane would announce beaming at her son. Well, Emily received a full scholarship to Columbia Law. Uncle Greg would counter, patting his daughter's shoulder. And then there was Uncle Troy, my father's older brother. Tall, imposing, and perpetually dressed in custom suits with gold cufflinks that caught the light whenever he gestured, which was often. As a successful real estate developer who owned half of Boston's waterfront properties, he was our family's unspoken patriarch, the one everyone tried to impress, the one whose approval determined your worth at family gatherings. "Your cousins are setting themselves up for life," Uncle Troy told me on my 16th birthday, while I was still basking in the glow of passing my driver's test. "What are your plans, Anahi? You're not exactly at the top of your class, are you?" The truth was, school had always been a struggle. Words jumbled on the page numbers transposed themselves, and no matter how many hours I studied, the information refused to stick. My parents took me to specialists, but in the early 2000s, learning disabilities weren't as well understood, especially in families like mine, where academic struggles were viewed as character flaws rather than neurological differences. "She just doesn't apply herself." I overheard my father telling Uncle Troy once, "If she worked as hard as Tara or Jason, she'd be getting as to." But I was working hard. Twice as hard as my cousins who breezed through advanced placement classes while maintaining active social lives. I spent Friday nights with textbooks while they went to parties. I woke up at 4 a.m. to review notes before tests. Nothing helped. My parents loved me, I knew that. But their love came wrapped in disappointment and concern. Every report card brought the same conversation. "We know you can do better, Anahi," my mother would say gently. "Look at how well your cousin Tara is doing with her college applications." Tara. Perfect Tara, with her perfect grades and perfect smile. She was only 6 months older than me, but seemed to exist in a different dimension of achievement and recognition. While she collected academic awards and extracurricular accolades, I quietly battled through each school day, celebrating small victories like finally understanding a chemistry concept or finishing a math assignment without errors. By some miracle and a well-written personal essay about perseverance, I was accepted to a state college. My family reacted as if I'd been granted admission by clerical error rather than merit. "Well, it's not University of Pennsylvania like Tara," Uncle Troy said at my graduation party. "But I suppose it's something. The important thing is that you finish, unlike your father's brother Gary." Now there's a cautionary tale. Uncle Gary, the other family disappointment, had dropped out of college to start a business that failed spectacularly. Now he lived in Arizona and wasn't invited to family functions. I promised myself I wouldn't end up like him, but college proved even more challenging than high school. The independence that my cousins thrived in became my academic undoing. Without the structured environment and parental oversight, I floundered. My grades dropped precipitously, and student loans piled up as I repeated courses I'd failed. After 2 years of this pattern sitting in my advisor's office, looking at another semester of probation, I made the hardest decision of my life. I think I need to withdraw, I said the words, feeling like rocks in my mouth. My advisor seemed relieved. Sometimes college isn't for everyone, Anahi. There are other paths to success. But not in my family. When I told my parents, my mother cried, and my father went silently to his study. The news spread through the family like wildfire, and the pity was almost worse than the judgment. The lowest point came at my grandfather's 70th birthday celebration. Everyone was there, including cousins home from their prestigious universities for the weekend. I had been working as a barista for 3 months, and had just been passed over for promotion to shift supervisor. Uncle Troy cornered me by the dessert table, bourbon loosening his tongue. You know what your problem is, Anahi. No grit. Life got a little hard, and you just gave up. Your grandfather worked 3 jobs to put your father through college, and this is how you honor that sacrifice, by quitting. You're a disappointment to this entire family. I fled to the bathroom, tears streaming down my face, and stayed there until my mother knocked softly on the door to tell me they were cutting the cake. When I emerged red-eyed and humiliated, everyone pretended not to notice, which somehow made it worse. That night I returned to the apartment I shared with 2 other girls, both students at my former college. As I collapsed onto my bed, ready to surrender to a spiral of self-pity, my roommate Jess burst into my room. Someone stole the rent money. $300 cash, gone from the envelope in my desk drawer. I sat up momentarily, forgetting my own problems. What? When? I don't know. I collected from everyone on Friday, but now it's gone. The landlord's coming tomorrow and we're going to be late. He'll charge us that $100 fee we can't afford. Who's been here since Friday? I asked, a strange calm settling over me. Jess looked confused by my question. Just us and Lisa had that study group yesterday, but they stayed in the living room. What about Lisa's new boyfriend? The one with the motorcycle? Jess's eyes widened. He was here while I was in class, but Lisa was with him the whole time, except when she took a shower. Her face fell. You think he took it? Let me see your room, I said suddenly, focused in a way I rarely experienced with schoolwork. I examined Jess's desk, noticing details others might miss. The slightly ajar drawer that she insisted she always closed completely. The disturbed dust pattern on her textbooks. The faint fingerprints on the lacquered box where she'd originally hidden the money before moving it to the envelope. Did Lisa mention where they were going tonight? I asked. Some new club downtown. Why? 2 hours later, we were standing outside the club as Lisa's boyfriend exited laughing with friends. I approached him directly, calm and certain. You took our rent money, I said. Not a question, but a statement of fact. $300 from Jess's desk drawer, while Lisa was in the shower. His face betrayed him instantly, eyes widening before narrowing in defense. You're crazy. You have no proof. Actually, I do. The bartender inside confirmed you paid for a round of drinks with 6 $50 bills. Interesting coincidence for a guy who Lisa says is always broke. Return the money now, or we're calling the police. The threat worked. He pulled out his wallet, handed over the remaining money, and quickly disappeared into the night. Lisa broke up with him the next day. How did you know? Jess asked me later. How did you put it together so quickly? I didn't have an answer then. I only knew that for the first time in years I'd felt competent. More than competent, I'd felt like the smartest person in the room. The sensation was so foreign, so unexpected, that it took me days to recognize it as confidence. After the rent money incident, something shifted in my perception of myself. I started noticing patterns and details others missed. When items disappeared around the apartment, my roommates came to me. When friends couldn't remember where they'd left their keys or phones, I was the one who could retrace their steps mentally and locate the missing items. You should be a detective or something, Jess joked, after I'd helped her reconstruct an entire evening to find her lost ID. I laughed it off, but the comment lingered in my mind as I cycled through dead-end jobs. Barista, retail associate, receptionist. Nothing stuck, nothing felt right. Each position either bored me to tears or overwhelmed me with the wrong kind of challenges. My family's disappointment became a background hum I tried to ignore. 6 months after dropping out, I moved to a cheaper apartment in a different neighborhood. My new neighbor, Marcus, was a retired police officer in his 60s who often sat on the front stoop of our building greeting everyone who passed by. "Morning, Anahi," he'd call out as I left, for my shift at the diner, where I'd been waitressing for 3 weeks. "Beautiful day for solving mysteries, isn't it?" It became our joke, after I helped him figure out who had been stealing newspapers from the building's lobby. Through casual conversations over shared takeout dinners, Marcus became the first person who didn't make me feel like a failure. "You know," he said one evening as we sat on the stoop watching the sunset, "you remind me of my former partner. Sharp eyes, good with people, notices things others don't. She was the best detective I ever worked with." I smiled, flattered, but skeptical. "Nice of you to say, but I couldn't even make it through college." Marcus snorted. "College? I know brilliant officers who never set foot in a university and idiots with master's degrees. School smarts and street smarts are different animals." "Try telling that to my family," I muttered. "Your family doesn't determine your worth, kid. Only you do that." He took a sip of his iced tea. "Ever thought about law enforcement?" I laughed. "Me? I can barely organize my sock drawer." "That's not what I see," he said seriously. "I see someone who observes, who connects dots, who understands human behavior. Natural investigator instincts. You can't teach that." The conversation stuck with me for days. I began researching law enforcement careers, something I'd never considered. Police officer, FBI agent, park ranger, customs officer. There were so many possibilities beyond the narrow path my family had defined as success. One listing caught my attention: U.S. Marshals Service, the oldest federal law enforcement agency responsible for fugitive operations, witness security, prisoner transport, and more. No college degree required, just rigorous testing and training. I mentioned it to Marcus during our next stoop session. "Marshals," he nodded approvingly. "Tough outfit to get into, but worth it. They do real work, not just shuffling papers. I know a guy who retired from there. Want me to introduce you?" Marcus's friend Glenn had served 20 years with the Marshals before retiring. Over coffee at a local diner, he answered my questions and shared stories that made my heart race with excitement. For the first time, I could envision a future that energized rather than terrified me. "The application process is brutal," Glenn warned. "Physical tests that will push you to your limits. Background checks that go back to kindergarten. Interviews designed to break you. And if you make it through all that, then comes the training at Glencoe. Many don't finish." "I'm used to failing," I said wryly. Glenn studied me thoughtfully. "Doesn't sound like failure to me. Sounds like you've been measuring yourself with the wrong ruler." With Glenn's guidance and Marcus's encouragement, I prepared my application. I started running every morning, added strength training, and took practice tests online. Glenn introduced me to other former colleagues who helped me understand what the service looked for in candidates. When I told my parents about my plan, they exchanged worried glances. "Law enforcement is dangerous," Anahi, my mother, said, "and very competitive. Are you sure this isn't setting yourself up for another disappointment?" "Maybe," I admitted, "but I need to try." To everyone's surprise, especially my own, I passed the initial assessments, then the physical fitness test, then the panel interview. Each hurdle cleared gave me confidence for the next. The background investigation was extensive, as Glenn had warned. Investigators interviewed my former professors, employers, and neighbors. When an investigator contacted my family, Uncle Troy called my parents immediately. A federal agent was asking questions about Anahi, he reported, concerned and confused. "What kind of trouble is she in?" When my mother explained I was applying to the Marshals Service, the silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. Finally, Uncle Troy cleared his throat. "Well, I suppose there's nothing wrong with civil service," he said diplomatically. "The benefits are good, at least." I was accepted into basic training at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia. For the first time in my life, my learning differences weren't obstacles, they were advantages. The tactical training, practical scenarios, and hands-on learning suited my brain perfectly. While other trainees struggled to remember codes and regulations, I absorbed them effortlessly. Physical training that left others exhausted energized me. Instructors who started out skeptical of my small stature and quiet demeanor soon recognized my determination and unique abilities. Martinez, my defensive tactics instructor, said, after I'd successfully taken down a male trainee twice my size, "You've got a gift for reading body language. You anticipate moves before they happen." Firearms training revealed another surprise. I had natural marksmanship abilities. My spatial awareness and focus liabilities in traditional classroom settings became strengths on the range. "Some people train for years to shoot like that," my firearms instructor commented, after reviewing my qualification scores. "It's like you were born for this." For 17 intense weeks I lived and breathed martial training. I made friends who respected me for my abilities rather than my family connections. I discovered parts of myself that had been dormant or dismissed. On graduation day, Marcus and my parents sat in the audience. My father cried when I received my badge and credentials, though he tried to hide it behind a handkerchief. "We're proud of you," my mother whispered when I joined them, after the ceremony still in my formal uniform. "I'm sorry we ever doubted you." As I prepared for my first assignment in the Boston office, I made a decision. Professionally, I would use my mother's maiden name, Bellini. Partly for security reasons, marshals often work undercover, but mostly for a fresh start. Anahi Bellini would be known for her own accomplishments, not measured against the Martinez family yardstick of success. I told only my parents about this decision. To the rest of the family, I simply said I had found a government job in law enforcement. They assumed it was something administrative and unimportant, and I didn't correct them. "At least she's employed," I overheard Uncle Troy tell my father at a family dinner. "That's something." Little did any of us know that 3 years later, our paths would cross again in ways none of us could imagine. As I settled into my role in the Marshal's service, focusing on fugitive apprehension, another investigation was slowly building momentum, one that would eventually lead straight to Uncle Troy's doorstep. The first 3 years with the U.S. Marshals Service transformed me completely. I started in fugitive apprehension, tracking down those who had fled to avoid facing justice. My first case involved a bail jumper who had skipped town before his trial for armed robbery. "He's got family in Vermont," my senior partner Jack told me as we reviewed the file. "Probably hiding out there." "His family's too obvious," I countered, studying the fugitive's history. "Look at his cell records. He called this number in New Hampshire 10 times the week before he disappeared." Jack was skeptical, but followed my lead. 3 days later, we apprehended the fugitive at a cabin registered to his ex-girlfriend's brother in the White Mountains. Jack never questioned my instincts again. I quickly developed a reputation for finding people who didn't want to be found. My colleagues called it luck, but it was observation and pattern recognition. The same skills that had failed me in traditional academic settings now made me exceptional at my job. "Bellini sees what others miss" became a common refrain in the Boston office. My success rate caught the attention of senior leadership. After 2 years of field work, I was promoted and assigned to a specialized task force, focusing on high-profile fugitives and white-collar criminals. Chief Marshal Reynolds, a stern woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses, perpetually perched on her nose, became my new supervisor and mentor. She had broken barriers as one of the first female deputy marshals in the Boston office, and didn't suffer fools gladly. "Your record is impressive, Bellini," she said during our first meeting reviewing my file. "But this task force handles complex cases with sophisticated targets. These aren't street criminals. They're educated, wealthy, and well-connected. They hide behind lawyers and offshore accounts, not in cabins in the woods." I nodded, accepting the challenge. "I understand, Chief. We'll see," she replied, not unkindly. "Your first assignment is the Harrington case. Familiarize yourself with it by tomorrow morning." The Harrington case involved a former hedge fund manager who had embezzled millions from client accounts before disappearing. I spent the night reviewing financial statements, property records, and personal history. The next morning, I presented my assessment to Chief Reynolds. He's not in Thailand like everyone assumes. The international transfers were misdirection. He's still in the country, probably in Seattle. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. That contradicts 6 months of investigation. What makes you so sure? His daughter has severe asthma. He has a prescription for her specialized medications being filled monthly at a pharmacy in Bellevue, Washington, under his wife's maiden name. They moved there 3 weeks before he disappeared. 2 days later, we arrested Harrington as he picked up his daughter's medication. Reynolds didn't say much when we returned to Boston, just nodded and said, "Good work, Bellini. What else have you got?" Under Reynolds' guidance, I tackled increasingly complex cases, learning the intricacies of financial crimes and developing sources in banking, real estate, and international finance. My promotion to full deputy U.S. Marshal came after I tracked down a notorious fraudster who had evaded capture for over 5 years. Throughout this professional growth, I maintained minimal contact with my extended family. I visited my parents regularly, but avoided family gatherings where I'd face Uncle Troy and the cousins who had once made me feel so inferior. My parents understood and respected my boundaries, proud of my success, but agreeing to keep the details private at my request. "Your uncle asked about you last week," my mother mentioned during one Sunday dinner. "Tara's getting married in the spring. They want to send you an invitation." I tensed. "Do I have to go?" My father reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "No, Misha. But maybe it's time to show them who you've become." I considered his words. Part of me wanted to walk into that wedding as Deputy Marshal Bellini, to see the shock on their faces. But another part, the part that had grown confident and secure in my identity, no longer needed their validation. "I'll think about it," I promised. The invitation arrived a month later, addressed to Miss Anahi Martinez at my apartment, gold-embossed cardstock, announcing the union of Tara Martinez and Bradley Wilson at Street. Cecilia's church followed by a reception at the Fairmont Copley Plaza, pure Tara, traditional, elegant, and expensive. I set the invitation aside, undecided, and turned my attention to a new batch of case files that Reynolds had assigned me. One particular file caught my attention, a multi-agency investigation into money laundering through real estate developments in Boston. The primary suspect list included several prominent developers and potential connections to organized crime. As I flipped through the preliminary reports, a familiar name jumped out at me: Troy Martinez Developments. I stared at the page, certain I had misread it. But there it was, my uncle's company listed as a business of interest in a federal money laundering investigation. My hand shook slightly as I turned to the next page, which included a photo of Uncle Troy shaking hands with Anthony Vassallo, a known associate of the Castiglione crime family. The timestamp showed the image had been captured 3 months earlier at a charity gala. I closed the file, heart pounding. It had to be a mistake. Uncle Troy was arrogant and judgmental, but a criminal. I couldn't process the possibility. The next morning, I requested a private meeting with Chief Reynolds. "There's something I need to disclose," I said, closing her office door. "The Martinez real estate investigation. Troy Martinez is my uncle." Reynolds' expression remained neutral, but her eyes sharpened. "I see. And you're just now mentioning this because I just saw the file yesterday. We're not close. I haven't spoken to him in over 3 years." I hesitated. "Is the investigation serious, or is he just on the periphery?" "That's classified information," Deputy Reynolds said firmly, "which you would know if you were assigned to the case, which you now cannot be." "I understand," I said quickly. "I'm not asking to be involved. I just wanted to disclose the connection." Reynolds studied me carefully. "Your integrity is noted, Bellini, but this puts us in an awkward position. The investigation is still in early stages. Nothing may come of it." She paused. "However, your knowledge of the family could potentially be useful in a strictly background capacity." "Whatever you need," I assured her. "My loyalty is to the Marshal's service." "Let's hope it doesn't come to testing that," she replied. "For now, this conversation stays between us. Continue with your other cases, but be available if the team needs contextual information. I nodded, relieved to have disclosed the connection but troubled by the implications. As I returned to my desk, I glanced at Tara's wedding invitation, peeking out from under a stack of files. The wedding was 6 weeks away. With a sudden decision, I pulled out the RSVP card and checked "Will attend." If Uncle Troy was involved in something illegal, maybe the wedding would give me insight into what was happening with him and his business. What I didn't realize then was how deeply entangled my personal and professional worlds were about to become, or that my decision to attend that wedding would set in motion a chain of events that would change my family forever. The investigation into Troy Martinez's developments proceeded quietly over the next few weeks. Though officially removed from the case, I occasionally fielded background questions from the investigative team. Would you characterize your uncle as flashy with his wealth? Has he traveled internationally frequently? Did his business expand unusually quickly at any point? I answered honestly, maintaining professional detachment while providing context that only a family member would know. Each question increased my unease about what they might be uncovering. Meanwhile, Tara's wedding approached. I splurged on a navy blue dress that subtly showcased my athletic build, a physical testament to how much I'd changed since the family had last seen me. I also had my hair styled professionally, the first time I'd done so in years. As I dressed for the ceremony, I reminded myself that I was attending as Anahi Martinez's estranged niece, not Deputy Marshal Bellini. I tucked my badge and credentials into a hidden pocket in my purse, a habit I couldn't break, and headed to the church. Street Cecilia's was packed with family, and Boston's elite, the pews adorned with elaborate white floral arrangements. I slipped into a seat in the back, nodding politely to distant relatives who did double takes upon recognizing me. The ceremony was predictably perfect. Tara glided down the aisle in a designer gown, her Harvard-educated groom beaming as she approached. Vows were exchanged, rings presented, and finally the newlyweds processed out to thunderous applause. At the reception, I was seated at table 11, far from the main family tables, a not-so-subtle reminder of my status. I made small talk with distant cousins and friends of the bride, who clearly had no idea who I was. "And how do you know Tara?" a woman in an expensive red dress asked. "We grew up together," I replied vaguely. "Family." After dinner and speeches, I headed to the bar for another sparkling water. Uncle Troy was holding court nearby, surrounded by admiring guests. He'd aged since I'd last seen him, more gray at his temples, deeper lines around his eyes, but his commanding presence remained unchanged. He spotted me as I turned to leave. "Anahi, is that you?" I forced a smile. "Hello, Uncle Troy." "Well, look at you," he said, eyes widening slightly as he took in my appearance. "You're looking healthy. What are you doing these days?" "Your father mentioned something about government work." "Administrative position," I said, with practiced vagueness. "Nothing exciting." "Civil service has its merits," he replied condescendingly. "Stability benefits reasonable hours. Not everyone is cut out for high-pressure careers." I bit back a retort about the pressure of tracking armed fugitives through abandoned buildings. "It suits me." Good, good. He nodded already, losing interest. "Oh, there's Senator Mitchell. Must say hello. Take care, Anahi." As he walked away, I noticed a man approaching him, a man whose face I recognized from case files, Anthony Vassallo, the Castiglione family associate. My pulse quickened as they shook hands warmly and moved to a quieter corner of the ballroom, heads bent in conversation. I casually repositioned myself within earshot, pretending to admire a flower arrangement. "The waterfront project is proceeding as planned," Uncle Troy was saying. "The zoning commission signed off last week." "Excellent," Vassallo replied. "Our friends are pleased. The financing structure is elegant." Speaking of which, Uncle Troy lowered his voice further. "I've been hearing whispers about federal interest in development projects. Nothing specific, just rumblings." Vassallo's expression hardened. "From your source?" "Yes. They're still in preliminary stages, but we should be careful. I've already started cleaning up the Brookline paperwork." Smart man Vassallo clapped him on the shoulder. That's why you're so valuable to us." They moved away, merging into different groups of guests. I remained frozen, processing what I'd overheard. Federal interest could only mean the investigation I knew about. And source suggested Uncle Troy had inside information, a leak in law enforcement. I needed to report this immediately, but doing so would reveal I'd been gathering intelligence at a family wedding. Before I could decide how to proceed, my mother found me. "There you are, sweetheart. Come say hello to your aunts. They've been asking about you." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of superficial conversations and deflected questions about my life. I maintained my cover as an unimportant government clerk, all while my mind raced with the implications of what I'd overheard. The following Monday, I requested another private meeting with Chief Reynolds. "I have information pertinent to the Martinez investigation," I said, closing her door. I recounted the conversation I'd overheard, careful to present it as an accidental discovery at a family function, rather than intentional surveillance. Reynolds' expression grew increasingly grave. "This confirms our suspicions about a potential leak. We've been tracking unusual information patterns but haven't identified the source." "What exactly is Uncle Troy suspected of?" I asked. Reynolds hesitated, then apparently decided I'd earned some transparency. "Your uncle's development company appears to be laundering money for the Castiglione family. He purchases properties at inflated prices, renovates them with mob-controlled construction companies that overcharge and kick back percentages, then sells the properties to shell companies that the crime family controls. And the inside source. That's our most urgent concern," Reynolds said. "If someone's feeding information to your uncle, it compromises the entire operation. We need to identify and neutralize that leak before proceeding further." She studied me thoughtfully. "This puts you in an exceptionally difficult position, Bellini. You've done the right thing by reporting this information, but your family connection makes your continued involvement problematic." "I understand," I said, though. The conflict tore at me. "For now, maintain complete separation from the case, but keep your eyes and ears open at any family functions. If you hear anything else, report directly to me." I nodded, accepting the compromise. Over the next few weeks, the investigation accelerated. Though officially uninvolved, I couldn't help noticing increased activity around the case. More meetings, new personnel, hushed conversations that stopped when I approached. Then came a development I hadn't anticipated. My mother called one evening, her voice unusually excited. "Your Uncle Troy has offered us an amazing investment opportunity," she said. "A limited partnership in his new waterfront development. He says it's going to triple in value within 2 years. My blood ran cold. "How much is he asking for?" $300,000, she said. "We'd need to take out a second mortgage, but Troy says it's guaranteed returns." The waterfront project, the same one Uncle Troy had discussed with Vassallo at the wedding. My parents were about to invest their retirement savings in a money laundering operation. "Mom, I don't think that's a good idea," I said carefully. "Why not? Troy's projects always succeed. He's offering this opportunity to family first, before outside investors. It's very generous of him. It just sounds too good to be true." I hedged, unable to reveal what I knew. "Maybe talk to an independent financial advisor first." "Your father already made an appointment with Troy for next week to sign the paperwork," she replied dismissively. "Don't worry so much, Anahi. Your uncle knows what he's doing." After hanging up, I paced my apartment, torn between professional obligations and protecting my parents. I couldn't tell them the truth without compromising the investigation, but I couldn't let them lose their savings either. The next day, I buried myself in case files searching for a solution. While reviewing documents related to Troy's previous developments, I discovered something disturbing. Several family members, including my parents, had invested in earlier projects. According to the records, those investments had been lost when the projects failed, despite the properties ultimately being developed successfully. It wasn't just organized crime that Uncle Troy was defrauding, it was our own family. Digging deeper, I found a pattern stretching back years. Uncle Troy had systematically targeted family members for investments in ventures designed to fail transferring their money into profitable endeavors that benefited only him and his criminal associates. I was checking property records when a particular document caught my attention. It referenced a college fund trust established for Anahi Martinez in 1989, the year of my birth. The trust had been liquidated in 2007, the year I started college, with the assets transferred to Troy Martinez personally as repayment of outstanding debt. My college fund. The money that should have supported my education had been stolen by Uncle Troy. The loans my parents had taken out for my tuition weren't loans at all. They were trying to replace what my uncle had taken. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My academic struggles hadn't been helped by the financial stress of loans that should never have been necessary. Uncle Troy had directly contributed to the circumstances that led to me dropping out. I sat back in my chair, a cold anger replacing my earlier confusion. This wasn't just about money laundering anymore. This was personal. My uncle had stolen from me, from my parents, from our entire family, while positioning himself as the successful patriarch whose achievements we should all aspire to. With renewed determination, I gathered the evidence of family fraud and brought it to Chief Reynolds. "This changes things," she agreed, after reviewing the documents. "If he's defrauding family members, there may be additional charges we can pursue." "My parents are about to invest $300,000 in his latest scheme," I told her. "I need to stop them without compromising the larger investigation." Reynolds considered this. "It might be time to bring your parents into a limited confidence. Not about the entire operation, but enough to protect them." "Is that allowed?" "In cases of imminent financial harm to innocent parties, we have some discretion," she explained. "I'll get the necessary approvals. In the meantime, see if you can delay their meeting with your uncle." I called my parents that evening, inventing an emergency that required their help over the weekend, the time frame when they'd planned to meet with Uncle Troy. My father agreed to reschedule for the following week, buying us precious time. 2 days later, with Reynolds' approval, I prepared to tell my parents a version of the truth that might save them from financial ruin without endangering the broader investigation. What I didn't know was that forces were already in motion that would soon bring the entire situation to a dangerous head. I arranged to meet my parents at their home on a Tuesday evening, when Uncle Troy would be at his weekly Rotary Club meeting. Chief Reynolds had given me permission to disclose limited information, enough to prevent them from making the investment, but not enough to compromise the investigation. As I pulled into their driveway, I rehearsed my carefully prepared speech. I would explain that I worked for the U.S. Marshals Service, that Uncle Troy was under investigation for financial irregularities, and that they should delay any investments until the situation was clarified. My mother answered the door, surprise registering on her face at my unannounced visit. "Anahi, what are you doing here? Is everything okay?" "We need to talk," I said, stepping inside. "Is Dad home?" She nodded, concern creasing her forehead. "In his study. Robert." She called. "Anahi's here." My father emerged from his study, reading glasses perched on his nose and a calculator in hand. He was likely working on finances for the investment, I realized, with a pang of guilt for what I was about to reveal. "This is a nice surprise," he said, embracing me. "Though you look serious. What's going on?" "Let's sit down," I suggested, moving toward the living room. Once we were settled, I took a deep breath. "I haven't been completely honest with you about my job." My parents exchanged worried glances. "I don't work in administrative government services. I'm a deputy U.S. Marshal." Their expressions shifted from concern to confusion. "A U.S. Marshal," my father repeated. "Like law enforcement?" I nodded, reaching into my purse to produce my credentials. "I've been with the service for over 3 years. I use Mom's maiden name professionally, Bellini. That's why the family doesn't know." My mother took the credentials, examining them with wide eyes. "But why keep this secret? This is amazing, Anahi." "At first it was because I wanted to prove myself without family expectations or comparisons," I explained. "Later, it became necessary for security reasons. But that's not why I'm telling you now." I leaned forward, choosing my next words carefully. I'm working on a sensitive case, and I've learned something that affects you directly. You need to delay your investment with Uncle Troy." "What?" My father looked startled. "What does your job have to do with Troy's development project?" "I can't give you specific details, but there are concerns about some of his business practices. The investment isn't what it appears to be." My parents sat in stunned silence, trying to process this abrupt collision of worlds. "Are you saying Troy is breaking the law?" My mother finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying there's an ongoing investigation, and until it's resolved, you shouldn't invest your money or sign any paperwork," I replied diplomatically. "I wouldn't tell you this if it wasn't serious." My father's expression hardened. "It's not just this investment, is it? There were others. The Cambridge project in 2016, the Southie renovation in 2019. We lost over $200,000 between them." I nodded grimly. "Those may have been structured similarly. And there's more." I hesitated before continuing. "I found records of my college fund, the trust Grandpa set up for me when I was born. Uncle Troy liquidated it the year I started college, claiming it was repayment for a debt." "What?" My mother's hand flew to her mouth. "That's impossible. Your grandfather established that trust specifically, so it couldn't be touched by anyone but you for educational expenses." My father's face had gone pale. "We trusted him with all the family finances after your grandfather died. He said the market crash had depleted the college funds, that there was nothing left." "He lied," I said simply. "And he's been lying about much more." The revelation hung heavy in the air between us. Decades of family dynamics and power structures recontextualized in an instant. "No wonder you kept your distance," my mother said softly. "All those years of him talking down to you, and you were out there protecting people while he was." She broke off, unable to complete the thought. "What happens now?" my father asked, his voice steadier than I expected. "Now you cancel your meeting with him. If he asks why, say you've decided to consult with an independent financial advisor first. Don't mention anything about an investigation, or my real job." They nodded, still processing. "There's one more thing," I continued. "The U.S. Marshals Service would like your help." "Our help?" My father looked surprised. "How?" "We need evidence of how these investment solicitations work. With your consent, we'd like you to proceed with the initial meeting, but wear recording devices. You wouldn't be in any danger. We'd have agents nearby at all times." My parents exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations long-married couples perfect over decades. "If he stole from our daughter, from us, from the family," my father began. "We'll do it," my mother finished firmly. Over the next 2 days, we planned the operation with meticulous care. My parents would meet Uncle Troy at his office wearing concealed recording devices. They would express enthusiasm about the investment opportunity and ask detailed questions that might elicit incriminating responses. Chief Reynolds herself oversaw the preparations. "Your parents are civilians, Bellini," she reminded me. "Their safety is the priority. At the first sign of trouble, we extract them." "Understood." "Absolutely," I agreed. The day of the operation arrived. I watched from a surveillance van parked across the street as my parents entered the gleaming glass tower that housed Troy Martinez Developments. Though they had no formal training, they carried themselves with remarkable composure. Through their hidden microphones, we listened as they were escorted to Uncle Troy's corner office with its panoramic views of Boston Harbor. "Robert, Maria, wonderful to see you." Uncle Troy's voice came through clearly. "I've got all the paperwork ready. This waterfront project is going to be transformative for the whole family's finances." "We're very excited," my mother replied, her voice betraying no hint of our conversations. "But we do have some questions about the structure of the investment." Of course," he responded smoothly. "It's a limited partnership arrangement. Your $300,000 gives you a 2% stake in the overall development with projected returns of 12 to 15% annually." "That sounds impressive," my father said. "How does that compare to your other family investment projects?" "The Cambridge one, for instance." A slight pause. "Well, unfortunately, not every project succeeds. Development always carries risks, but this one is as close to guaranteed as they come. Because of your special arrangements with the contractors, my mother asked innocently. Another pause longer this time. What do you mean by special arrangements? Just that you must have excellent relationships with your construction partners to guarantee such returns, she clarified smoothly. Ah, yes. Absolutely. Years of working together creates efficiencies. The conversation continued with my parents expertly drawing out details about financing structures and investor protections that confirmed our suspicions about the fraudulent nature of the offering. Then, unexpectedly, Uncle Troy's office door opened. Through the audio feed, I heard a new voice, one I recognized immediately. Special Agent Dawson from the FBI, one of the agents supposedly working with our task force on the investigation. Sorry to interrupt, Troy, Dawson said casually. Didn't realize you had a meeting. No problem, Paul. These are my brother and sister-in-law. Paul's with the bureau. One of my golf buddies, Uncle Troy, explained to my parents. My blood ran cold. Dawson was the leak, the inside source, feeding information to my uncle. And now he was in the room with my parents. Nice to meet you, Dawson said, his tone friendly, but his words carrying a subtle threat that only I could recognize. Troy, can I speak with you privately for a moment? It's about that sensitive matter we discussed. Of course. Robert, Maria, would you mind stepping out for a few minutes? Help yourself to coffee in the reception area. As my parents left the room, our audio feed captured the beginning of a hushed conversation. They're wired, Dawson said urgently. This is a setup. What? That's impossible. They're my family, Uncle Troy protested. Trust me, I just got word from my source at the Marshals. Their daughter, she's not some government clerk. She's a deputy marshal working the case against you. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. There was another leak. Someone in our office had exposed me and the operation. My parents were now in immediate danger. Chief, I said urgently to Reynolds, who sat beside me in the surveillance van. We need to extract them now. She was already issuing orders into her radio. All units move in. Targets compromised. Extract the civilians immediately. But it was too late. The audio feed from my parents' devices went dead, cut off mid-sentence as they waited in the reception area. They're jamming the signals, Reynolds realized. Move, move, move. I was out of the van before she finished speaking, drawing my service weapon as I raced toward the building. The next few minutes were a blur of tactical movements, flashed badges, and terrified office workers as our team stormed the building. When we reached the executive floor, the reception area was empty. No sign of my parents. Uncle Troy's office door was locked. You! S. Marshals Reynolds shouted. Open the door. Silence. One of our tactical officers moved forward with a battering ram. The door splintered on the first hit, revealing an empty office. A private elevator in the corner stood open, its indicator showing it had recently descended to the parking garage. They're moving them, I realized aloud. Basement parking. Our team rushed to the main elevators and stairwells, but I knew we'd be too late. Uncle Troy would have contingency plans, escape routes, private security. The realization that I had put my parents in this danger made me physically ill, but I forced the feeling aside. Now was the time for action, not guilt. As we descended to the basement level, my phone vibrated with an incoming text from an unknown number. We have your parents. The family disappointment should know better than to betray blood. If you want to see them alive again, come alone to the Charlestown warehouse. You have 1 hour. The Charlestown warehouse. It could only be the abandoned shipping facility near the naval yard that Troy's company had purchased for future development 3 years earlier. I recognized it from property records I'd reviewed during the investigation. They've taken my parents to the Charlestown warehouse, I told Reynolds, showing her the text. They want me to come alone. Absolutely not, she responded immediately. This is clearly a trap. We'll mobilize tactical teams, coordinate with Boston PD, create a perimeter. That will take too long, I interrupted. They've given me 1 hour, and they're spooked. If they see a law enforcement presence, my parents are in immediate danger. You're not going in alone, Bellini. That's not happening. Then, give me a small team. 2 agents, no marked vehicles. We can be there in 15 minutes. Assess the situation and call for backup if needed. Reynolds hesitated, weighing the options. Take Matthews and Rodriguez. Both are former special forces. Unmarked vehicle, minimal equipment. You observe only until backup arrives. Is that clear? Crystal, I agreed, though we both knew I'd do whatever was necessary to save my parents. We moved quickly, changing into tactical gear in the van, as Matthews drove toward Charlestown. I checked my sidearm, secured my vest, and tested my communications equipment. What's your plan? Rodriguez asked, as we approached the warehouse district. I'll make initial contact while you two find positions, with eyes on the main entrance and loading dock. If my parents are visible and the situation allows, we extract immediately. If not, we wait for backup. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all we had. As we neared the location, Matthews cut the headlights and pulled onto a service road behind an adjacent building. Comms check, I said, adjusting my earpiece. Clear, Matthews confirmed. Clear, echoed Rodriguez. Remember, observation only until backup arrives. I reminded them, knowing, even as I said it, that circumstances might force a different approach. The warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking concrete structure, with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. A single light glowed from what appeared to be an office area on the second floor. A black SUV with tinted windows was parked by the loading dock. Uncle Troy's vehicle I recognized. I count 2 guards at the main entrance. 1 at the loading dock, Matthews reported, scanning the perimeter through night vision binoculars. Probably more inside. I nodded, formulating a strategy. Matthews maintained position with eyes on the main entrance. Rodriguez moved to the east side near the fire escape. I'll approach from the front. Bellini. Matthews began to object. I need to establish contact. I cut him off. They're expecting me. Once I confirm my parents' location and condition, we'll reassess. Before they could argue further, I moved toward the warehouse, keeping to shadows until I reached the main entrance. The guards, both wearing suits despite the late hour and industrial setting, spotted me immediately. Deputy Marshal Bellini, I presume one, said with a smirk. I kept my expression neutral. I'm here to see Troy Martinez. Arms out, turn around the other, instructed. We need to check you for wires. I complied, allowing them to pat me down and confiscate my service weapon and phone. They'd missed my backup ankle gun, a rookie mistake that might prove useful later. She's clean, the first guard announced. Take her up. They escorted me through the cavernous main floor of the warehouse, past stacked shipping containers and construction equipment, to a freight elevator. We ascended to the second floor, where they led me to what had once been the facility manager's office. Uncle Troy sat behind a metal desk, looking strangely composed in his tailored suit. Agent Dawson stood beside him, his FBI credentials still displayed on his belt, despite his obvious betrayal. My parents sat on folding chairs against the wall, frightened, but apparently unharmed. Anahi, my mother, cried when she saw me. It's okay, Mom, I assured her, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. Everything's going to be fine. The prodigal niece returns, Uncle Troy, said his voice carrying the same condescending tone I'd heard all my life, though now it was edged with something harder. Or should I say, Deputy Marshal Bellini, you've been keeping secrets from the family. Where I work is my business, I replied evenly. Let my parents go. They have nothing to do with this. Uncle Troy laughed, a sound without humor. On the contrary, they agreed to wear wires to gather evidence against me. That makes them quite involved. They were protecting their savings from your scheme, I countered. Just like you stole my college fund and their previous investments. I reallocated family resources to more promising ventures, he corrected. Someone with your limited business acumen wouldn't understand the complexities. I understand fraud and money laundering perfectly well, I said coldly. And so will a jury. Agent Dawson stepped forward. There won't be any jury, Deputy. You've walked into a situation you can't control. Your backup is too far away to help, and by the time they arrive, we'll be gone and this building will be ash. My father straightened in his chair. Troy, this is madness. We're family. Family doesn't betray family, Uncle Troy snapped. You chose her side, the disappointment, the dropout. The federal officer, I corrected. And you're wrong about backup. My team is already in position. Dawson smirked. Bluffing won't help you. We've been monitoring all law enforcement channels. The main response force is still 15 minutes out minimum. He was right about the main force, but not about Matthews and Rodriguez. Through my earpiece, I heard Matthews whisper, in position at the east window. Rodriguez has neutralized the loading dock guard. We have clear shots on both targets. I needed to keep them talking. So what's your plan? Kill federal officers and flee the country. You won't get far. My plan, Uncle Troy said, standing and moving toward a laptop on the desk, is to make it look like an unfortunate accident during a sting operation gone wrong. Gas leak, electrical spark, tragic, but not suspicious. He turned the laptop to show a timer counting down. 8 minutes remaining on what was clearly a detonator for explosives. Meanwhile, with Agent Dawson's help, I'll be on my private jet to a country with no extradition treaty before anyone realizes what happened. And your source in the marshal's office? I asked, stalling for time, the one who exposed me. Insurance policy, Dawson replied smugly. High enough in your chain of command to deflect any investigation that gets too close. That revelation hit hard. Someone senior in our office, possibly even with direct authority over our team, was compromised. Chief Reynolds, I asked, dreading the answer. Dawson laughed. You think we'd tell you? Besides, it doesn't matter now. The timer on the laptop ticked down to 7 minutes. I needed to act. You're not walking away from this, Troy, I said with more confidence than I felt. The evidence doesn't disappear if I do. The task force has everything. Your laundering operations, the family fraud, all of it. Uncle Troy's composure slipped slightly. What task force? Dawson assured me the investigation was preliminary, just getting started. He lied, I said, simply. We've been building a case for months. Financial records, surveillance, cooperating witnesses. Your waterfront project has been compromised from day one. Dawson shifted uncomfortably. She's bluffing. My sources would have known. Your sources aren't as well informed as you thought. I pressed, seeing the doubt creeping into my uncle's expression. The Castiglione family is already cutting ties. They don't appreciate the federal attention you've brought them. That struck a nerve. Uncle Troy turned to Dawson, suspicious now. You said they were protected, that you had everything under control. I do, Dawson insisted, but his confidence was wavering. Through my earpiece, Matthews whispered, Main response team 6 minutes out. Fire department alerted to possible explosives. I needed to keep them distracted and divided. Did Dawson tell you he's been skimming from your payments to him, setting up his own offshore accounts? That's a lie, Dawson said angrily, but Uncle Troy was already pulling up screens on his laptop. What account in the Caymans? He demanded. Account number ending in 4397. Dawson's face betrayed him before he could respond. While they argued, I caught my father's eye and subtly nodded toward the door. He understood slowly, helping my mother to her feet while the two men were distracted. Matthews, Rodriguez. My parents are moving toward the door. I murmured, knowing my earpiece would pick it up. Cover their exit. The timer showed 5 minutes remaining. We need to leave now, Dawson was saying to Uncle Troy. Forget them. The charges are set. Not until I verify these transfers, Uncle Troy insisted. If you've been stealing from me? Dawson drew his gun. There's no time for this. We're leaving. The distraction was all I needed. As Uncle Troy and Dawson faced off, I moved swiftly, pushing my parents toward the door, while simultaneously drawing my backup weapon from my ankle holster. Federal agent, drop your weapon, I commanded, aiming at Dawson. Everything happened at once. My parents fled through the door. Dawson turned his gun toward me. Uncle Troy lunged for the laptop. The window shattered as Matthews fired a precision shot, striking Dawson in the shoulder and sending him crashing to the floor. Uncle Troy grabbed the laptop and backed toward a side door. The detonator timer, now reading 4 minutes. It's too late, Anahi. No one can stop it now. The building's rigged to explode, I shouted into my earpiece. All units evacuate. 4 minutes. I kept my gun trained on Dawson, who was clutching his bleeding shoulder. Don't move. Your uncle's getting away, he gasped through pain. Let him run, I replied coldly. He won't get far. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway. Your parents are clear. Bomb squad's 3 minutes out, but they won't make it in time. Get Dawson out, I instructed. I'll find the main charge. Bellini. No. That's an order. I know this building from the property records. The support column on the main floor is the most likely location. Rodriguez hesitated, then nodded, hauling Dawson to his feet. 2.5 minutes. Don't cut it too close. As they hurried out, I raced down the freight elevator to the main floor, scanning for the central support column I'd noted in the building plans during the investigation. The warehouse was designed with one primary load-bearing column that, if compromised, would bring down the entire structure. I spotted it near the center of the floor, a concrete pillar wrapped in what appeared to be industrial plastic. Tearing away the covering revealed a sophisticated explosive device with its own timer display, 2 minutes 15 seconds. My explosives training had been basic enough to recognize, but not necessarily disarm complex devices. This one had multiple wires, a backup power source, and what looked like anti-tampering measures. One wrong move could trigger an immediate detonation. Outside, I heard sirens approaching. Through my earpiece, Reynolds was ordering all personnel to maintain a safe perimeter. No one was coming to help. This was on me. 1 minute 40 seconds. I examined the device more closely. The primary timer connected to a detonator cap, which would trigger the main explosive. If I could separate the two without triggering the anti-tampering measures. 1 minute 15 seconds. With steadying breaths, I carefully removed the outer casing to expose the internal wiring. Red, blue, yellow, green. Which one controlled the connection between timer and detonator? My training indicated blue was typically the safe wire to cut in commercial explosives, but this was a custom device. 50 seconds. I traced each wire to its connection point. The yellow wire ran from the timer to the detonator cap. The red connected to what appeared to be the anti-tampering mechanism. The blue and green were harder to identify in the dim light. 30 seconds. A decision had to be made. I didn't have time to second guess. Following my instincts and training, I carefully isolated the yellow wire. 20 seconds. I took a deep breath, said a silent prayer, and cut the yellow wire. The timer stopped at 18 seconds. The device remained inactive. For a moment, I couldn't move, adrenaline and relief flooding my system in equal measure. Then I was running, sprinting toward the exit, as backup teams established a perimeter outside. Explosive. Disarmed. I shouted into my earpiece as I burst through the main doors. Repeat. Device is neutralized. The scene outside was controlled chaos. Police vehicles, fire trucks, ambulances, and tactical teams securing the area. My parents sat in the back of an ambulance being checked by paramedics. When they saw me, they rushed over, enveloping me in desperate embraces. We thought my mother couldn't finish the sentence, tears streaming down her face. I'm okay, I assured them. We're all okay. Chief Reynolds approached, her expression a mixture of relief and exasperation. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen, Bellini. Maybe a bit of both, I admitted. Your uncle is in custody, she informed me. Tried to reach his car but ran straight into the tactical team setting up the perimeter. Dawson's being transported to the hospital under guard. He mentioned a source high up in our office, I told her quietly. Reynolds nodded grimly. We'll find them. For now, let's get you and your parents somewhere safe. There's going to be a lot of debriefing and paperwork. As we walked toward a waiting vehicle, I realized something profound had shifted. For the first time in my life, I felt fully seen by my family, not as a disappointment or a dropout, but as who I truly was. The irony wasn't lost on me that it had taken this crisis for that recognition to happen. The next few weeks would bring investigations, interrogations, and eventually a federal trial where I would face my uncle one final time. But in that moment, with my parents safe beside me and the immediate danger neutralized, I allowed myself a moment of quiet triumph. The family dropout had just saved the day, and nothing would ever be the same again. 3 months later, I stood in the marble hallway of the federal courthouse, adjusting my formal uniform one last time before entering the courtroom. As the lead investigator and a key witness in the case against Troy Martinez and his associates, my testimony would be crucial to the prosecution's case. My parents sat in the front row of the gallery, my mother clutching my father's hand nervously. Behind them were rows of family members, aunts, uncles, cousins, many of whom had lost money to Uncle Troy's schemes over the years. They'd been shocked to learn of his crimes, but perhaps even more shocked to discover my true profession. The internal investigation had identified Assistant Director Hargrove as Dawson's source within the Marshal's service. Both men had agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences, providing evidence against Uncle Troy and the Castiglione crime family. Chief Reynolds stood by the prosecution table reviewing documents with the federal prosecutor. She caught my eye and gave me a reassuring nod. After the warehouse incident, she'd recommended me for a commendation and promotion. "You broke protocol," she'd told me privately, "but you saved lives and showed exceptional judgment under pressure. That's what makes a great marshal." The courtroom doors opened, and the bailiff escorted Uncle Troy in. He wore an orange jumpsuit instead of his customary tailored suit, his wrists and ankles shackled. Our eyes met briefly as he shuffled to the defense table. Where once I might have seen condescension or dismissal, I now saw only defeat and perhaps a flicker of regret. His defense attorney, a former prosecutor turned high-priced defender of white-collar criminals, had already indicated they were seeking a plea deal. The evidence was too overwhelming, the witness list too credible. Even Uncle Troy recognized when a strategic retreat was the only option. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Hammersmith entered the courtroom. After the formalities, the federal prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, in the matter of United States versus Troy Martinez, we have reached a plea agreement with the defendant. To Mr. Martinez has agreed to plead guilty to 37 counts, including racketeering, money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy. He will surrender all assets derived from criminal activity and provide testimony against members of the Castiglione organization." The judge reviewed the agreement carefully, and the government's sentencing recommendation, 20 years, Your Honor, with the possibility of reduction to 15 years based on the value of the defendant's cooperation. Judge Hammersmith turned to Uncle Troy. "Mr. Martinez, do you understand the terms of this agreement and enter this plea voluntarily?" Uncle Troy stood slowly. "Yes, Your Honor." "Very well. The court accepts the plea agreement. Before we proceed to sentencing, there are victim impact statements to be heard. The first witness will be Deputy U.S. Marshal Anahi Bellini." My heart pounded as I approached the witness stand. The prosecutor smiled encouragingly. "Deputy Marshal Bellini, would you please state your relationship to the defendant for the record?" "Troy Martinez is my uncle. I am the daughter of his brother Robert Martinez." "And in what capacity are you appearing today?" "Both as a law enforcement officer involved in the investigation and as a victim of the defendant's financial crimes." The prosecutor nodded. "The court calls Deputy U.S. Marshal Bellini." A murmur swept through the courtroom. From the corner of my eye, I saw Uncle Troy's face go white as the full reality of the situation seemed to hit him for the first time. His niece, the college dropout, the family disappointment, was now a respected federal officer whose testimony would help send him to prison. I took the oath and began my testimony detailing the investigation, the evidence recovered, and the impact of Uncle Troy's crimes on both his criminal targets and our family members. I spoke of the college fund he had stolen, the investments he had siphoned away, the trust he had betrayed. Deputy Marshal Bellini, the prosecutor, asked, "How did the defendant's actions affect you personally?" I paused, gathering my thoughts. His theft of my college fund contributed to financial hardships that ultimately led to me leaving university before completing my degree. For years, I carried the weight of that perceived failure, believing I hadn't measured up to family expectations. I looked directly at Uncle Troy for the first time, but that failure became the greatest blessing of my life. It forced me to find my own path, to discover strengths I never knew I had. While I condemn his actions and the harm he caused to so many, I can't regret the journey those actions set me on. Uncle Troy couldn't hold my gaze. He looked down at his hands, shoulders slumped in a posture I'd never seen from him before. After I finished testifying, other family members spoke. Aunt Diane described how Uncle Troy had convinced her to invest her inheritance in a project that mysteriously failed while he profited. Cousin Jason detailed the investment scheme that had cost him his medical school savings. One by one, the family members he had betrayed stood and spoke their truth. When all testimony concluded, Judge Hammersmith addressed Uncle Troy directly. "Mr. Martinez, your crimes were not just violations of law, but violations of trust. You preyed upon those who loved and respected you, using family bonds to facilitate fraud. There is no greater betrayal." She sentenced him to the full 20 years with no early release provisions regardless of his cooperation. As the bailiff led him away, Uncle Troy paused beside me. "I was wrong about you, Anahi," he said quietly. "You were never the family disappointment." "I know," I replied simply. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around Chief Reynolds and the prosecution team. I stood off to the side with my parents finally able to breathe freely now that justice had been served. "You know what I keep thinking about my mother," said, squeezing my hand. "That awful day at your grandfather's birthday when Troy humiliated you by the dessert table. If only we had known then where each of you would end up today." My father shook his head. "I wish we'd defended you more strongly back then. We let his success blind us to what really matters." "It's okay," I assured them. "Everything happened exactly as it needed to for me to become who I am." The following weekend, the extended family gathered at my parents' home, not for a holiday or celebration, but simply to reconnect after the turmoil of the trial. Cousins who had once looked down on me now asked about my work with genuine interest. Aunts and uncles who had whispered about my failure now spoke of my courage and dedication. Tara, my once perfect cousin, sat beside me on the porch swing. "I've spent my whole life doing what was expected," she confessed. "Prestigious schools, respectable career, appropriate marriage. But watching you these past few months made me realize I've never once taken a risk or followed my own instincts." "It's never too late," I told her. "The path doesn't matter as much as the courage to walk it authentically." 6 months later, I received my official promotion to Supervisory Deputy U.S. Marshal, taking over a specialized task force focused on financial crimes. My family attended the ceremony beaming with pride, as Chief Reynolds pinned the new badge on my uniform. "Deputy Marshal Bellini represents the finest qualities of the U.S. Marshal's Service," she announced to the gathered crowd. "Integrity, perseverance, and unwavering courage in the face of danger." Her recent actions in the Martinez case exemplify the dedication to justice that has defined the Marshal's Service since 1789. As applause filled the room, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From struggling student to college dropout to respected federal officer, a path I never could have imagined for myself. The judgments and expectations that had once defined me had become irrelevant in the face of discovering my true calling. Success, I realized, isn't measured by degrees or titles or family approval. It's found in the courage to follow your own path, even when others can't yet see where it leads. It's having the strength to define achievement on your own terms, rather than accepting others' narrow definitions. Sometimes, the moments we consider our greatest failures become the unexpected doorways to our most authentic successes. And sometimes the people who underestimate us give us the greatest gift of all, the freedom to surprise them, and in doing so, discover the full measure of our own capabilities. What I once saw as my greatest shame, leaving college without a degree, had ultimately led me to the place where I was always meant to be. Not despite my differences, but because of them. The very qualities that had made traditional education challenging had made me exceptional in my chosen field. So, let me ask you what failure in your life might actually be redirecting you toward your true path. What judgment from others might you be carrying that doesn't actually belong to you? Sometimes our greatest strengths are hiding in the fording, shadows of what others have labeled our weaknesses. If you found inspiration in my journey from family disappointment to Deputy U.S. Marshal, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories of unexpected triumph. Share with someone who might need the reminder that their path doesn't have to look like everyone else's to be valuable and worthy. And comment below with your own story of a setback that ultimately led you somewhere better than you'd planned. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's often the unexpected detours that lead us exactly where we're meant to be.